I wasn't panicking. I wasn't even devastated anymore. I was tired, deeply tired. But underneath that exhaustion sat something unexpected: relief. Losing the job had initially felt catastrophic, like the destruction of everything stable in my life. But sitting alone in that quiet kitchen, I understood the truth. The job wasn't the thing destroying me. The constant performance was. For years, I had been acting out loyalty for people who already viewed me as replaceable. The moment my usefulness disappeared, so did their affection. That realization hurt, but it also freed me. The next morning, I called Iris. We had worked together at Harrow Financial for nearly 7 years before she left to start her own consulting practice. Unlike most people at the company, Iris believed competence mattered more than politics. We stayed loosely connected after she left. Occasional coffee meetings, a few text messages, industry gossip. When she answered the phone, I told her everything: the layoff, the house, my family, the silence afterward. She listened quietly, then she laughed softly and said something I still think about all the time. "I've been waiting 3 years for you to realize you deserved better." I didn't know how to answer that. Then she asked if I wanted to discuss becoming a partner in her firm, not an employee. A partner. The word startled me. I told her I needed a week. That week changed everything. I walked along the beach every morning while cold wind rolled off the water. I slept properly for the first time in months. No constant anxiety, no emotional tension hanging over every conversation, no pressure to fix everyone else's problems before acknowledging my own. Most importantly, I finally looked carefully at my finances. Really looked. Years of careful saving had created more stability than I realized. The beach house rental income covered most maintenance expenses. My investments remained solid. For the first time in years, my future wasn't tied to whether someone else approved of me. By Friday, I called Iris back, and I said yes. The partnership moved quickly after that. Within 2 months, we signed several mid-sized clients through old professional contacts I maintained from Harrow. The work was demanding, but something about it felt completely different. Every decision mattered because it belonged to us. No executives hiding behind restructuring meetings, no corporate speeches about loyalty before eliminating entire departments. Just work, honest work, and mutual respect. 3 weeks after I left home, my mother finally called. Not to apologize, not to check on me, not to ask where I was living. She called because Renata needed help setting up an online baby registry account and was apparently having trouble with the website. That was the reason. That was what finally broke the silence. I remember standing in the kitchen, holding the phone while ocean waves crashed softly outside. For a moment, I actually smiled. Not because it was funny, because it was absurdly predictable. I told my mother calmly that I wasn't available and hoped Renata figured it out. Then I ended the call. My father never contacted me at all. Renata eventually sent a text asking whether I still planned to pay for the streaming subscription we shared. I canceled it that same afternoon. Oddly enough, that tiny decision brought me an unreasonable amount of satisfaction. Months passed. Business improved rapidly. By the 5th month, I was earning more money than I ever made at Harrow. By the 8th month, I started researching additional properties. Not because I needed them, because for the first time in my adult life, I was building something entirely for myself. Around that time, my Aunt Phyllis visited the beach house. She was my father's older sister and the only family member I trusted enough to tell where I was staying. She sat quietly at the kitchen table, looking around the house with an unreadable expression. Then she sighed. "Renata moved into your old room." I nodded slowly. Apparently, the arrangement wasn't going well. Renata's boyfriend had left. The baby was due soon. My parents were now paying most of her expenses because she quit another job. Then Phyllis hesitated carefully before speaking again. "Your mother asked whether you might be willing to help out financially." I laughed quietly, not cruelly, just tired. Even now, after everything, they still viewed me as a resource before a person. Phyllis looked embarrassed delivering the message. Then she surprised me. "I'm sorry it took me this long to check on you." I believed her. And strangely enough, that was enough. I never returned to my parents' house. Not out of bitterness, not out of revenge. I simply no longer needed anything waiting behind that front door. The beach house wasn't a trophy, proving I succeeded without them. It was simply a place that existed quietly until the exact moment I needed it. Some things in life are built for survival, long before you realize survival will become necessary. That house saved me, not because it was expensive, not because it overlooked the water, because it gave me space to remember who I was when nobody else was demanding pieces of me. My parents threw me out during the worst week of my life. They never asked where I went. They never knew about Clearwater Ridge LLC, and they never knew about the beach house sitting quietly beside the ocean waiting for me to arrive. Some victories don't need witnesses. Some escapes don't require explanations, and some doors are meant to close forever once you finally understand your worth. The porch light flickered on automatically as I walked toward the front door carrying my suitcase. I unlocked the door and stepped inside. The house smelled faintly like sea salt and cedarwood, quiet, clean, safe. I set the suitcase down near the hallway and stood there listening to the silence. For the first time in years, nobody needed anything from me. No bills, no errands, no emotional labor disguised as family responsibility, just silence. And strangely, it felt peaceful. I turned on the kitchen light and made coffee because it was the only automatic action my exhausted brain could think of. Then, I sat at the small wooden table beside the window, overlooking the dark ocean. Hours passed. I didn't cry. I didn't panic. I just sat there thinking, really thinking, not reacting, not surviving, thinking. And sometime around 2 in the morning, a realization settled quietly over me. Losing the job wasn't the end of my life. It was the end of a role I had been trapped inside for years. The dependable daughter, the reliable provider, the family safety net. I had spent so long performing loyalty that I forgot what actual self-respect looked like. The next morning, I called Iris. We had worked together at Harrow Financial for years before she left to start her own consulting practice. Smartest person I knew. Also the only person who ever warned me that the company would eventually collapse under its own politics. When she answered, I expected awkward sympathy. Instead, after hearing the full story, she laughed softly. I've been waiting for you to leave that place for years. I leaned back in the chair. That obvious? To everyone except you. That hurt a little, mostly because it was true. Then she asked if I wanted to discuss becoming a partner in her consulting firm. Not an employee, a partner. I told her I needed time to think. Truthfully, I already knew the answer. But after years of making decisions based on everyone else's needs, I wanted to experience making one slowly for myself. So I stayed at the beach house for the rest of the week. I walked along the shoreline every morning. I slept properly for the first time in months. I reviewed my finances carefully, and for the first time in years, I imagined a future that wasn't built entirely around supporting other people. By Friday, I called Iris back and accepted. Everything changed quickly after that. The consulting business grew faster than either of us expected. Within weeks, we signed our first clients. Then, more arrived. Most came through relationships I had quietly built during my corporate years. Turns out, competence creates opportunities even after companies stop valuing it. The work was exhausting, but it was honest. No office politics, no executives pretending loyalty mattered while preparing layoffs behind closed doors. Just work shared between people who respected each other. 5 months later, I was earning more than I had at Harrow. 8 months later, I started looking at additional property investments. Around that same time, my Aunt Phyllis came to visit the beach house. She was my father's older sister, and one of the few relatives who had ever treated me like a person instead of a resource. She sat at the kitchen table quietly looking around the house. Then she smiled softly. You built this without any of them knowing? Yeah. She shook her head slowly. Good. That surprised me. Then she told me what had happened after I left. Renata had moved into my old bedroom almost immediately. Her boyfriend disappeared shortly afterward. The baby was due within weeks. She had quit another job, and now my parents were paying for everything. Apparently, my mother recently mentioned wondering whether I might be willing to help out a little. I actually laughed. Not bitterly, just genuinely amused. Phyllis studied me carefully. You don't seem angry. I thought about that. I was angry before the silence, before the beach house, before the clarity. Now I was just finished. There is a difference between revenge and freedom. Revenge keeps you emotionally tied to people who hurt you. Freedom quietly removes their access to you completely. I never returned to my parents' house. Not once. I didn't need closure. I didn't need validation. And I definitely didn't need them seeing what I had built afterward. The beach house wasn't revenge. It wasn't a trophy. It was simply a place built quietly by a version of myself who must have known someday survival would require distance. And when that day finally came, the door was waiting. Some people spend their entire lives begging for love from people who only value usefulness. Others eventually learn something harder but far more important. The moment someone treats your suffering like an inconvenience, you stop owing them access to your life. My parents threw me out on the worst night of my career. They never asked where I went. They never knew about the company. They never knew about the house beside the ocean. And honestly, I'm glad they didn't. Because some things are built quietly for yourself alone. Not to prove anything, not to make anyone jealous, not to earn delayed respect, simply because survival sometimes requires a private place where nobody can take pieces of you anymore. And for the first time in my life, I finally understood that protecting your peace is not selfish, it's necessary.